All right, it is time. It's the Infinite Investment Game. I'll talk about alternative investments and collectibles. And it's not particularly investment advice, but hopefully helps you make better decisions when parking your money in collectibles. And today I have another article from Rinker. It's more about graded video games. So it's going to be, a graded video game talk. But I think you can learn something from other collectibles if you're in other collectibles as well. And Rinker is a very prominent columnist, writer. Just does a lot in antiques and collectibles. They're just like a legend. They wrote many books, like over 20 books. So they're just very experienced. This article came out in 2019, and I'll put a link in the description. And also, please comment, tell me what you think about the article, and please comment, like, and subscribe, and I will respond back to you. So, are graded video games the equivalent to graded comic books and baseball cards? So in 1988, Scott Bruce authored the 50 and 60s Lunchbox published by Chronicle Books. A year later, House of Collectibles published his official price guide to Lunchbox collectibles. The two publications were two parts of an elaborate plan to create a $1,000 lunchbox. Okay. And Bruce announced his intentions in advance. He succeeded. One of the most interesting moments in collecting history. Bruce openly proved how easy it is to manipulate the antiques and collectibles secondary market. So that's an interesting example. So I'm embarrassed to inform readers that Bruce developed his game plan from my How to Make the Most of Your Investments in Antiques and Collectibles, the first insider guide to manipulating the antiques and collectibles market to maximize your investment, published by Arbor House and William Moore in 1988. I am pleased the book is long out of print and extremely difficult to find on the used book market. Interesting. Nothing has changed since I wrote this book. Speculators and or investors continue to manipulate the antiques and collectibles secondary market as the second decade of the 21st century ends. I encourage readers to read Kyle Orland's article entitled "Why is the copy of the Super Mario worth $100,000?" I believe it sold more than that in recent time, 3 years later. And on October 3rd, 2019, I received an email from Jason Bailey, a reporter for the New York Times. He was researching an article about the retro game market, which has been seeing some high water prices in auctions and private sales this year. He asked if I had time to chat with him about whether video games have potential to join the more established world of comic books and sports cards. We talked for over half an hour. Jason has interviewed me several times during the last decade. He usually calls when he wants an objective opinion about a collecting trend. Talking to the involved, he only hears positive. I point out positives and negatives on firm belief there are always two sides to a question. There are often more sides when discussing antiques and collectible trends. I informed Jason that I had been following the rapidly increasing prices for early video games in the collectible secondary market for almost a year and was planning to write a column about it. Jason asked me not to scoop him. I agreed. When this Rinker on collectibles column is published in late December or early 2020, Jason's article will have appeared. When interviewed by a reporter, only snippets of our conversation appear in print. The following is an expanded version of Jason's and my interview. I am sharing it because it shows how much more sophisticated the manipulation of the antiques and collectibles secondary market has become in the last 30 years since Scott Bruce's 2 books and my book appearance. Taking the high ground, initially I told Jason that there was a long list of positives already in place to create possible long-term video game collecting market. First, the earliest video games are now 50 years old. As a result, games from the first 20 years fall outside Rinker's 30-year rule. For the first 30 years of anything's life, all its value is speculative. For the first 30 years of anything's life. Okay. In fairness to video games, the rule was meant to apply to the date of initial manufacture. I wonder if the timeline should start when a collecting category attracts collectors and not when the object in the collecting category was first manufactured. The secondary video game market is only 10 to 15 years old. To establish a viable secondary collecting market, a number of key events must take place. The first event is the creation of a collector's checklist identifying which objects are important for and which are not. Print is preferable, but online is acceptable. A detailed guide to the most important games explores 5 decades of game evolution, published by Lorenz Brooks in 2014, checks this off the list. The second is the Price Guide for Organization Collectors Trust, Kerry Woods, the Overstreet Guide to Collecting Video Games, published in 2017. The third is a group of closet collectors who are willing to compete actively to secure video games they do not own. As they become more competitive, the fourth key falls into place: the sale of video games through auction and private treaty sales through a nationally established auction house. In the case of video games, auctions of Dallas, Texas, and possibly get any bigger than this. Okay. The fifth is an orchestrated publicity campaign to spread the concept that early video games are collectible and, more importantly, desirable. The recommended article is suggesting reading at the beginning of the column is a classic, one of the best hype collection pieces I've ever read. Eventually, the online and print media began to run the press and hype stories. The 6 key events, the national media stories, add credibility to the hype. A bandwagon effect takes place. Individuals who previously had no interest in collecting games want a piece of the action, especially if there is a profit to be made. 4 keys are enough. 6 are enough to guarantee surefire success. The group behind creating and manipulating the secondary market for video games added 2 more. First, they created a grading service, hence the comic book and sports trading card connection. The fact that the owners of the grading service are the very individuals creating the speculation fever is the subject of great concern. Second, the strong museum of play, the most important toy/play museum in the United States, created an international center of history of electronic games in 2009. Its collection already includes more than 55,000 video games. Time to play police officer and blow the whistle and stop and take a moment to think. Is the picture really as rosy as it seems? The answer is no. There are viable concerns that need to be addressed. First, the secondary market for video games has not stood the test of time. The number of individuals currently involved in the market limited compared to comic books and sports trading cards. further, the individuals manipulating these markets are financial investors, not collectors. They are interested in only one thing: selling for a profit. I agree with that. I mean, that's the only reason I bought some video games, really just buy and sell for a profit. As the market returned to the latter half of the 1980s, when the answer to the who is the winner question was not the person who paid so much for an antique or collectible, that they would never be able to recover what they paid during their or their heirs' lifetime, but the person who had the cash leading up to the final fatal sale. Every speculative market eventually crashes. It can happen in less than a decade. For example, Beanie Babies. Often it takes several decades, just as any hop-along Cassidy collector. I don't know what that is, but I'm assuming video games can end up like this thing, what people don't know about. Speculators do not love the objects. They love the money they represent. They have no guilt selling objects whose long-term worth is questionable. Second, video games are generational. Individuals want the games with which grew up. No 20-somethings giving a darn about video games from 40 to 50 years ago. They have no identity with them. When one asks the who will care in the 50 years question, the answer is bleak, not cloudy or indefinite. Third, electronic technology does not stand still. Modern video games and devices used to play them are a far cry from the Atari hardware games. Will the machines to play older video games and individuals who can repair those machines even exist? There are those who remember a generation who felt the handheld pocket calculator would be around forever. There is no forever in collecting terms. Virtual reality, the electronic advancement that will replace the video games, is already on the scene. The end of the golden age of classic video games is now. Video games may linger for a decade or two, but they eventually will disappear, as will the generation that remembered them. Grading and encapsulating video games, especially unopened packaging, assume the video game inside is viable. Grading does not ensure this. Kodak 35mm color slides and VHS tapes did not hold up over time. There are mites that attack to and destroy CDs and DVD discs. The long-term viability of video game to retain its initial quality has not been tested. There is no guarantee the quality and playability of a video game will not deteriorate over time. I am betting it will. Finally, all hype is on early and prototype video games. No one knows the exact product number for any game. The numbers are largely best guesses. Further, there is no understanding of the survivability rate of video games. It will require a decade or more to sort out which are scarce and which are not. Most of the speculators, investors will be in and out of the market by that time. Graded boxed video games are not the next graded comic books or sports car market. When the dust settles, they will be more likely to compare to the early American brown furniture and Hummel market. But yeah, that's the video. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and also just let me know what you think about this. I think this just means that comics and sports cars is probably better to put money in if you're thinking about it as an investment, but also as a collectible. I think more people will care long term just because they have longer histories.